There was a time when he spoke, and the room did not change. His words moved forward, gentle and sincere, yet they seemed to pass through the air without touching anything. Faces remained the same. Eyes drifted elsewhere. It was not loud rejection, not even clear dismissal, just a quiet absence of response, as if what he offered simply dissolved before it could be received. At first, he did not question it, not deeply. He told himself it was nothing, that perhaps the moment was wrong or the timing imperfect. But moments passed, and then many more, and something began to settle in his chest. A small, unspoken, "Have you ever felt that?" When you speak, but it is as though your voice carries no shape, no weight, no place to rest. He began to notice the patterns. When others spoke, there was a shift in the room, a turning of attention, a subtle acknowledgement. But when it was his turn, the air stayed still. Conversations moved around him, not toward him. His presence felt optional. It was not that they were unkind, not openly. They did not push him away or raise their voices. And yet, there was something quieter, something harder to name, a kind of invisibility that does not announce itself, but slowly reveals itself through silence. At times, he would pause after speaking, just for a second, longer than usual, waiting, not for praise, not even for agreement, just for a sign that he had been heard. But the pause would stretch, and then quietly close, unnoticed by anyone else. And so, little by little, he began to speak less. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of a quiet realization that his words were not landing where he thought they would. And in that realization, something inside him started to change. There is a certain kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being present and unseen. It is soft, almost gentle at first, but it lingers. It asks questions without words. Why does my voice feel so light? Why do I feel like I am standing just outside the moment? He did not have answers, only observations. He noticed how often he adjusted himself, how he tried to shape his words differently, hoping they might reach further this time. He softened his tone. He chose his words carefully. He waited for the right moment to speak, and still, the same quiet outcome. And then, slowly, the effort began to fade. Not in defeat, but in stillness. He started to listen more. Not because he had nothing to say, but because saying it no longer felt necessary. There was a calmness in observing, in watching how things moved without him needing to step in. At first, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, like standing in a space where you once tried to fill every gap and now choosing not to. But as time passed, the discomfort softened, and in its place, something quieter began to grow, a kind of awareness. He began to see things he had not noticed before, the way attention shifted, the way certain voices carried weight, not because they were louder, but because they were expected, the way people listened, not always to understand, but sometimes just to respond. And in seeing all of this, he turned inward. just slightly. Not to withdraw completely, but to listen, not to them, but to himself. Because in the absence of being heard, a different question began to form. If no one is listening, what is it that I truly want to say? The room had not changed. They had not changed, but something within him was beginning to move. Quietly, almost invisibly, just like he once felt. And this time, it did not feel like emptiness. It felt like the beginning of something he did not yet fully understand, but could no longer ignore. They continued as they always had. Their voices filled the space, rising and falling, weaving through each other with ease. Laughter appeared in the same places. Attention moved in the same familiar patterns. From the outside, nothing seemed different at all. And yet, for him, something had quietly shifted. He no longer felt the same urge to step forward. It wasn't that he had nothing to say. Thoughts still came, clear and thoughtful, shaped by everything he observed. But now, he held them for a moment longer. He let them rest within him, instead of offering them out into a space that had never truly received them. And in that pause, he began to notice something unexpected. His silence had a presence. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to miss. But it was there, like a still surface of water that reflects more than movement ever could. He was no longer reaching outward, trying to be seen. Instead, he was simply there. And strangely, that stillness felt heavier than all his previous efforts. They began to glance at him, just for a second longer than before. Not with understanding, not even with curiosity, but with a quiet uncertainty. As if something about him no longer fit the shape they had grown used to. He did not react. He did not rush to fill the silence they now seemed to notice. He simply remained. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not rise in volume or demand attention. It exists quietly, beneath the surface, steady and unmoved. And sometimes, it is only when someone stops trying to be heard that their presence begins to be felt. But they did not understand this. To them, his silence looked like distance, like withdrawal, like something had been taken away. They were used to him offering pieces of himself, even if those pieces had gone unnoticed. And now that he no longer did, it unsettled something, even if they could not explain why. They began to misread him. Perhaps they thought he had grown cold or indifferent. Perhaps they believed he had nothing left to give. The space he once tried to fill now felt different. And in that difference, they placed their own meanings. But he did not move to correct them. He did not explain, because something inside him had begun to understand a quiet truth. Not everything needs to be clarified to be real. Have you ever noticed how quickly silence is judged? How easily it is mistaken for emptiness? When in truth, it can be full of things unspoken, yet deeply understood. He carried that silence gently, not as a shield, but as something he was beginning to trust. It no longer felt like something forced upon him. It felt chosen, and within that choice, there was a kind of peace. He no longer waited, after speaking, hoping for a response, because now he spoke only when it felt necessary, and when it did not, he allowed the moment to pass without resistance. There was no tension in it, no quiet disappointment, just a calm acceptance of what was and what was not. They still moved around him, still filled the space with their voices and their assumptions. But now he observed without feeling pulled into it. Their reactions, or lack of them, no longer shaped how he saw himself, and that was new. For so long, being unnoticed had felt like something lacking within him, like a question without an answer. But now, as he sat within his own quiet, that feeling began to loosen its hold. Maybe it was never about being seen. Maybe it was about seeing clearly without needing anything in return. He did not arrive at this understanding all at once. It came slowly, like the soft fading of light at the end of a long day. Gentle. Unforced. Almost unnoticed, until it was already there. And with it, a certain tension left him. He no longer felt the need to measure his presence through their attention. He no longer searched their faces for signs of recognition, because what he was beginning to find was something quieter and far more steady. A sense of self that did not depend on being acknowledged, and in that his silence deepened, not as an absence, but as something whole. There came a moment, quiet and ordinary, when everything could have gone the way it always had. A voice rose, sharp enough to be noticed. A few eyes turned. The air shifted slightly, as if waiting for something to happen next, and for a brief second, all attention brushed past him, close enough to feel, but not quite resting. It would have been easy to step forward then, to speak, to explain, to correct what was being misunderstood. The words were there, already formed, already waiting. He could have said them clearly. He could have made himself known in that moment, shaped the way he was seen, perhaps even changed it for a long time. That is what he would have done. Not out of weakness, but out of a quiet hope that this time things might be different. That this time his voice would land where it was meant to. But something in him paused. Not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. He felt the familiar pull, the urge to respond, to step into the space, and claim it before it moved on without him. It was a gentle pressure, almost instinctive, the kind that had guided him so many times before. And yet, he did not follow it. Instead, he stayed still. The moment stretched slightly, just enough for him to see it clearly, not just what was happening around him, but what was happening within him. The urge, the expectation, the quiet anticipation of being either heard or overlooked once again, and in that, seeing things softened. He realized that he did not need to rush toward that moment. He did not need to chase it, or shape it, or prove anything within it. Whether they listened or not, whether they understood or not, it no longer held the same weight it once did. So he let the moment pass. The words remained unspoken. At first, it felt unfamiliar, almost like leaving something unfinished. But there was no regret in it. No lingering tension. Just a quiet stillness, as if something that once demanded energy had gently released its hold. They continued as they always did. The conversation moved forward, reshaping itself without him. Their voices carried on, filling the space, unaware of the choice he had just made. To them, nothing had changed. But within him, everything had. Because for the first time, he had not reacted. He had not stepped forward out of habit. He had not tried to correct what they saw or did not see. He had simply allowed the moment to exist without needing to enter it. And in that, he discovered something unexpected. A kind of power that did not come from being heard, but from not needing to be. Have you ever felt that shift? That quiet moment when you realize you are no longer controlled by the same pull that once guided you. It is not loud. It does not arrive with certainty or pride. It comes gently, almost unnoticed, like a door opening inward rather than outward. He began to understand that not every moment deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. And not every silence is a loss. Some silence is a loss. Some silences are choices, and within those choices there is strength. He did not feel smaller for holding back. If anything, he felt more steady, more grounded in something that did not depend on the movement around him. The need to be acknowledged, to be understood, to be seen in a certain way. It began to loosen its grip. Not completely, not all at once, but enough for him to feel the difference. He no longer stood at the edge of each moment, waiting for his place within it. He allowed moments to pass without asking what they meant about him, without measuring his worth, through their attention or absence, and slowly a quiet clarity began to take shape. His voice had value, whether it was heard or not. His presence had weight, even in silence. And most importantly, he could choose when to offer it and when to keep it. They did not notice this. They did not pause or reflect on what had changed. To them, he was still the same quiet figure, standing just outside the center of things, but they could not see what he now carried within him. A stillness that was no longer uncertain. A silence that was no longer empty. And a choice that no longer needed their permission. Time moved quietly, as it always does, without asking to be noticed. Nothing dramatic marked the change. There were no sudden shifts in the way they spoke, no moment where everything turned and faced him at once. The world around him continued in its familiar rhythm, steady and unchanged. And yet, something had settled within him. His silence was no longer something he carried carefully, as if it might be misunderstood. It had become natural, like a calm breath that no longer needed to be controlled. He did not think about it as much. He simply lived within it. They still spoke over him at times. They still overlooked him in the same quiet ways, but it no longer reached him in the same place. Before, each moment of being unseen had felt like a question, a quiet uncertainty that lingered, asking if something was missing, if something needed to be proven or corrected. But now, that question had faded, not because they had answered it, but because he no longer needed it answered. Have you ever noticed how cess, the omething loses its weight? The moment you stop carrying it, he began to move differently, though it was not something anyone could easily point to. There was no effort in it, no attempt to appear strong or distant. It was simply a quiet alignment within himself. When he spoke, it was rare, but it was clear, not shaped to fit the moment, not adjusted to gain approval. Just simple, steady words that came and went without attachment. And if they were received, he did not hold on to it. If they were ignored, he did not follow after them. He let them be. And in that, there was a kind of freedom. They started to notice, though not all at once. At first, it was just a subtle pause, a slight hesitation, as if something about him no longer matched the way they remembered. His presence, once easy to overlook, now carried a quiet firmness, not demanding attention, but no longer shaped by its absence. There is a difference between someone who is silent because they feel small and someone who is silent because they have nothing to prove. And slowly, that difference began to reveal itself. They could not quite explain it. There was no clear reason, no single moment they could point to. But something about him felt settled, unmoved by the small currents that once pulled at him. Their voices still filled the space, but his silence no longer felt like a gap between them. It felt like something complete on its own. And that changed the way it was seen. Not loudly, not all at once, but gradually, undeniably. Some began to listen when he did speak, even if they did not realize why. Others simply grew quieter around him, as if sensing a stillness they could not disturb. And some continued as they always had, unaware of anything beyond their own patterns. But none of it mattered in the same way anymore, because his peace was no longer tied to their awareness. It did not rise when they noticed him, nor fall when they didn't. It remained steady, quiet, unshaken. He had once thought that being seen would change something within him. That recognition would bring a sense of completion, a feeling of finally arriving somewhere he had been trying to reach. But now, he understood something softer and far more lasting. He had arrived the moment he stopped seeking it, the moment he allowed himself to exist without needing to be reflected in their eyes. And in that realization, there was no pride, no desire to prove anything, only a calm, grounded sense of self that asked for nothing and lacked nothing. They may have begun to see him differently, or perhaps they had not. It no longer made a difference, because the quiet strength he carried was not something they could give or take away. It was his, and it had always been